Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, Election 2014, House Districts 51 and 4. Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff with Hawaii News Now, your host for tonight's show. Tonight we shine the spotlight on the communities of Kailua, Lanikai, and Waimanalo on the island of Oahu. We'll hear from Incumbent Representative Chris Lee, a Democrat, and his Republican challenger, retired insurance executive and former Mormon Bishop Wayne Hikida. Both candidates ran unopposed in the primary election. Midway through our show, we'll pivot our attention to two candidates from Puna, attorney Joy San Buenaventura, who ousted incumbent Representative Faye Hanohano in the Democratic primary, and Republican Gary Thomas, a retired U.S. Air Force colonel. We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Tonight, the seating arrangement and order of the questions was determined by random draw. Now to our first two candidates. Representative Chris Lee, a Democrat, was first elected to the State House in 2008. He is chairman of the State House Energy and Environmental Protection Committee. Last year, he was also one of the more prominent champions for the special legislative session that legalized same-sex marriage in Hawaii. Wayne Hikida, a Republican, is a retired insurance executive now affiliated with specialty insurance firm IC International. Mr. Hikida is active in the Church of Latter-day Saints and has served as a Mormon bishop. This political newcomer decided to run for office in part because of his support of traditional marriage. And the first question to you, Chris Lee, is about traditional marriage and about same-sex marriage. You, as a leader of the special session, you've taken a lot of flack. In fact, that's one of the reasons Mr. Hikida is running against you. A lot of people were critical because the special session seemed to sort of push that issue through. Looking back, do you have any regrets about how you handled that?
You know, I don't. I mean, that was an issue that is one of those big issues, and that one's been 20 years in the making now. So finally getting a chance to be a part of resolving that, I think was something that I'll never forget. You know, it was pretty clear that with the Supreme Court ruling that summer that marriage should be available to everybody and not just some people, it really signaled that something had to be done, and the governor called the legislature into special session. It was amazing because there was more public testimony, there was more attention devoted to this issue than any other since I've been elected. With 57 hours of testimony, usually you get one, maybe two on an issue. And we really, I think, vetted that one more than anything else. But what was really impressive was hearing from the community. I mean, we heard from thousands of people. I went to neighborhood boards to ask them. I mailed to the community. Actually, I spent $1,000 of my own money that I could have put to car payments to mail out to figure out where people fell on this issue. And at the end of the day, it was pretty clear that our district, we had heard from roughly 63% were in support. But more than that, I mean, this is an issue of providing equal rights and the 1,100 federal benefits to all couples that weren't provided before this.
Let me try this question to Mr. Hikida. Do you agree that a majority of the district were supportive of marriage equality?
Well, I don't think so. And I guess that's part of the reason why I ran. As far as equal benefits, I don't think anybody opposes equal benefits for people. And I think it's only right. But the process of marriage, the sanctity of marriage, I think that's something that is something that, in my mind, is more of a moral issue, and I don't know that the government should be involved in that. As I went around the district, going house to house, it is still a concern, but even more of a concern was the way in which the legislature, essentially rammed this through.
No, I hear that repeatedly from folks. I even heard it from some people who supported marriage equity. What about it was ramming it through? You heard Representative Lee say this was actually a way for the whole legislature to focus on the issue. Is ramming it through really the reason people oppose it, or is it just going to be opposed regardless of whether it was rammed through or done in the regular course?
Well, I think if people had the ability to vote on it, and if it was passed, then you would have no problem. But the people I know and went and testified, were heavily opposed to it. And just my personal observation, shortly after this was passed, licenses were issued, and knowing the state and how they work, it must have been something that was already in the process. And so I think the general feeling is, gee, this was done, it was a done deal.
Let me ask this, Representative Lee, was this a conspiracy, a theatrical endeavor that had a preconceived end?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I think it was one of those that we didn't know what was going to happen until the very end. I didn't know. I had no idea. Nobody was really counting the votes.
Okay, I'm sorry, come on. Nobody was counting votes. I mean, everybody counts votes.
Sorry, everybody counts votes, but nobody really knew where they were going to fall.
Okay.
And there are clearly a bunch of folks who were on the fence until the very last day. But I think this is something that, when you talk about putting this up to a vote, rather than having it decided through our elected political process. I mean, you can go back. My parents were from here. My dad, local boy, married a Hawai'i woman. And just a few decades ago, that was illegal. And it wasn't until the Supreme Court had to step in and say, you know what, this is wrong according to the Constitution. Everybody deserves to be able to marry because this is a fundamental right. Government shouldn't be in the place where it's telling people who you should or should not love. And that's something that, just like civil rights and the legalization of civil rights and giving women the right to vote, these are things that were not put before the people to vote on because they're fundamentally protected by our Constitution. And I guess I just say more than that. At the time, 1968, when that happened, when interracial marriage was finally legalized, only 20% of the American public supported that. And that's something that blows my mind, because if we had actually put that up to a vote and waited, it could have been decades. I mean, my parents could not have been married. And that's something that's really scary, which is why the Constitution is so important. And it's so important that we follow that and allow equal rights and freedom for everybody.
Mr. Hikida,
Yeah.
so where is this going now? Where do you see this going? Like, if you get elected, will you feel like, because so much of this campaign focused on this issue, that you have a mandate to walk into the legislature and try and get this overturned?
No, it is the law of the land, and I respect that. You asked me if I agree with it, and the answer is no. I don't agree with it. I think, again, marriage is ordained of God between a man and a woman. Do I respect the views of others? Yeah. People have the right to choose what they want. But like my children, they don't always agree with what I believe in. But I love them nevertheless, and that's how I perceive this. I still am against that because I think it undermines traditional values.
Well, let me ask
of the
though. I
family.
mean, this is something I've heard from a number of folks who were very active on this issue and actually ran. And I've heard it before that, oh, it's a done deal. It's the law. In fact, former Lieutenant Governor Iona, that's his mantra when you bring up this issue. But in fact, why would you run if you're not going to then turn around and do something about it when you get elected?
Good question. And lest people paint me as a one-issue candidate, as I looked at this, I had overall dissatisfaction with a number of things that are happening in our state. And I think, there's some things we're doing good, but I think we could do better. And that's why I'm running. This is one of several issues that I think are important to our state.
Okay, this is one thing that
go ahead.
I think we do agree on, that the issue perhaps is somewhat done in the public sector and in terms of that debate, because I mean, if you look at my generation, for example, and others even younger, I mean, you have overwhelming support, 70, 80, 90% in some cases. And so as each year passes, that support continues to grow, and eventually, hopefully 20 years from now, I think we'll be able to step back and look back and say, this is something that, why are we even debating this?
Do you think you really see that vision? Do you think it'll get like that, or do you think this is something that's going to be?
I don't think so. Again, my personal opinion is there influences money from outside of Hawaii that came to change who we are, and I think if we allow that to happen, then we lose what is unique about Hawaii. I think Hawaii is probably one of the nicest people in the world. There's a big difference. You walk around Chicago, you walk around Honolulu or New York. We are very unique people. And as we begin to change the values and the thoughts that we have, I think we change ourselves, and I don't know that that's good.
I would disagree and I know we got to move on to
No, that's fine.
but I think this is an important one.
Yeah.
I think when you talk about having an influence here locally versus having somebody come in and tell you how it's going to be, I think that's the exact reason why the legislature agreed to go in after the governor called us into session, because there were federal cases pending in federal courts that were soon to be decided, just like the dozens and dozens of others in other states that unilaterally legalized marriage equality. And had that happened, we would not have had a say locally. And what would have happened is that every church Mormon, Catholic, you name it, would have had to provide for same-sex marriages, provide space for ceremonies, and doing this locally, hearing from the public and passing a bill that provides explicit exemptions so that if a church doesn't want to be involved, they don't have to in any way. I think that's really the way to go. And it also provides, most importantly, I think, religious freedom. Religious freedom for those churches who, like my church growing up, the Episcopal Church and the Methodist Church, which I'm now a part of, it provides religious freedom for those churches to be able to marry their own members of the same sex because it's in accord with their own beliefs. And the law previously prohibited them from doing that.
Let me, Mr. Hikida, just let's try to make this the last question. He did bring up the sort of, I won't call them peripheral, but the additional issues that are raised. You know, once you have marriages taking place, then it begins to ripple out into the marriage industry, into various places where there might be some discussion at the state legislature about how to handle certain things. Do you think that at least will be a place where people who are conservative on this issue will have things to say and have things to change? That is, things like public accommodations. Do businesses that serve this industry have to do same-sex marriages, for example? Do you think that's something that may still be debated further?
You know, I would think so. You know, if I'm not mistaken, there was a Religious Restoration Act that the legislature looked at and I think declined to pass, and that would have given churches protection from doing things that are contrary to their beliefs. Yeah, this is something I think is still up in the air, and you know, hopefully, being the community we are, you know, we'll get through this. But again, you know, there's just in my mind, as I go around, there's some dissatisfaction how this was done.
Let me ask just for a yes or no question. We'll put this to bed. Do you feel, and I know there have been some discussions among the folks who are opponents of same-sex marriage, that there will absolutely not be an effort to repeal this law in the next legislature?
Well, and you know, if you ask me, I don't know. I really don't.
Okay, let me move on now. I want to go quickly to viewer questions because we're getting some already, and we appreciate that.
At least we're interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun. I appreciate it. And this is an interesting issue for the Waimanalo district. You have a lot of shoreline property, and so it brings up, this caller is Sean Campbell from Waikiki. What plans for mitigating and adapting to climate change do the candidates plan for Hawaii? You folks have a lot of shoreline property. Folks are putting up seawalls to protect their property. You know, where do you stand on climate change? And now let me start with you, Representative Lee, because this is your committee. How urgent is an issue at the legislature? What kind of things are we going to see? And what do you think should happen, you know, that will affect your district when it comes to climate change?
You know, this is a big issue. You can look at Waimanalo. You can look at Kailua. Kailua Beach, for example, is eroding at a faster rate than ever before, and that beach is, you know, the center of the economy and our local community, and it'd be tragic if we were to lose it. So one of the things that we have been looking at is what can we do? We know already that climate change is happening. There's been 8 inches of measured rise in the sea level here in Hawaii over the last 100 years. The water's 30% more acidic. I mean, there's all kinds of factors that we're playing with. So one of the things we did, actually a bill I wrote this past year, was the Hawaii Climate Adaptation Initiative. And whether you believe in climate change or you don't, and that whole national debate doesn't matter. We know what's happening, and the question is how do we adapt, whether it's man-made or not. And what this really does is 3 things. It establishes central coordination. So if money's coming in from the federal government, you have the counties and the state, all the planning is going to be done in one place. We're going to assess the best science we possibly have to look out to 2050, to look way into the future, to figure out where we're going to be at that point, what's the worst possible scenario, and then figure out how we're going to plan to meet it and what we're going to do. This process is getting underway. The bill was signed into law just earlier this year, so about a year from now, we should have plans that are community by community, allowing a community like Kailua, for example, or a community like Waimanalo or Waikiki.
Let me give Mr. Hikida a chance. Do you feel this kind of urgency about the climate change issue?
Well, you know, as far as climate change, you know, what we can do about it, you know, I don't know that Hawaii is a major contributor to climate change. You know, whatever we do is minuscule in comparison to what's happening in the other parts of the world. But, you know, I would agree with Representative Lee. We probably need to look at the impact on Hawaii, and are there ways that we can mitigate any potential damage to Hawaii?
And also, you're an insurance executive. You know all about property risk, and
Right.
I imagine that you're taking it seriously. You're not a denier by any stretch of the impacts of a changing environment.
Well, we know the environment is changing. Whether it's changing to the extent and the speed which you see, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. There is change. How much?
And this year we had quite a lot of storms and a lot of action going on, so it is kind of spooky in some way. A couple of callers have called in today about HECO, about energy. Let me put the question to you. Do you feel like more needs to be done to accommodate the growth of solar? Do you think that Hawaiian Electric Company, particularly in Oahu, but across the state, has been accommodating, or do you think they've been a barrier?
Well, I think they're trying their best, but it appears to me that many people have overestimated the amount of solar that's coming into Hawaii, being placed in Hawaii. I think personally, though, that we need to look at all alternative methods of energy, sources of energy, because the sun doesn't shine at night. And I do recall the biblical 40 days of rain that we had. And so, I think we need to move forward with solar, but I think we need to look at all alternative sources of energy. It's important. And in the meantime, I know that the PUC was talking about the LNG, and I think something we should pursue would help reduce cost.
I know that's right in your sweet spot too, that issue. But I think there are some people who have accused you of being too friendly with HECO. You want to respond?
Oh, hardly.
To that?
I think
that's what some of these letters are saying.
I think I'm getting coal from HECO for Christmas this year. Really, right now the beef is between folks who want to install solar and the utility company, and we have thousands of people in our district, and hundreds still who I hear from on a regular basis saying, "I want to install because my energy bill's 3 times the national average, $300, $400, $500 a month," and they want to figure out how they can cut that down. And solar is one of those options. But right now, the brakes have been put on it by the utility because they want to study it some more and so forth and come up with solutions. So one of the bills we passed this past year that I wrote was trying to push them to actually install more. But the bigger question, and hopefully that's going to have a big effect actually in our area, but the bigger question is going to be, what does the utility do in the future? Because they are on a business model that's now 100 years old. And so the market, I think, is going to be the one to solve this. Already we can see people demanding solar and demanding battery storage, so that even if you do have 20 days of rain or whatever, or the sun goes down each day, you have the ability to power your own home. That technology is commercially viable, and the utility is going to have to adapt their business model in order to account for those people, because they're going to start leaving the grid, and we can't let the utility hold people back.
Let me ask, though, really quickly on point is, do you feel like the structure of our utility system can even move quickly enough to accommodate the rapid changes in the marketplace and in technology?
Honestly, I don't know, because it's a huge organization. You've got multiple points of view on their board and everywhere else. It may come down to, and it probably will come down, just like in other states around the country and other municipalities, where the government steps in and says, you know what, in the benefit of the public interest, you have to adapt. You have to either turn into a company that just transmits energy and lets everybody else generate fairly, or you have to find some other way to change your business model and allow more people to save money, because in 10 years' time, it's very evident that it's going to cost just as much to get off the grid and power your own home by yourself as it will cost to stay on. And who wants to stay on when you have that option?
Do you want to add anything to that discussion? Are you interested in, are you hearing from a lot of people who are complaining that they can't get their solar?
Yeah, and and I'm one of those who put on solar, and I'm happy with it. The only thing I feel bad about is actually people who don't have solar, are essentially subsidizing people like myself. And so, it would be nice if everyone was able to get what they wanted, but I think it is a process. It's going to take a while. Like we talked earlier before, any ship as large as this takes a while to turn. I think we're going in the right direction, but I think additional oversight from the PUC and the legislature is very critical to getting to where we want to be ultimately.
Okay, another big question. Let me start with you, Mr. Hikida. This question actually comes from a known Republican.
There's two of us then.
Yes, and I'll let you take the first shot at this. Basically, it says that Representative Lee voted for pension tax, raising the GET, and imposing internet tax why don't those hurt the party? How do you feel about your opponent's record on taxation?
Well, I think that particular question, it's a fair question. The cost of living in Hawaii is I think, the highest in the nation, and things like this don't really help us economically, individuals, and so that's one of the things I think we need to address. We're the highest tax people in the nation, and I don't know that we need to continue to overburden our people with additional taxes.
If I could just step in for a minute, I want to correct something, because I actually voted against the pension tax. I voted against higher income taxes, against higher vehicle registration fees, against a whole number of things that would have created a higher cost of living here for our residents. I think I've got a strong record of that going back for years, and I've always kept our district up to date about that. I mean, the issue of taxation is one where we want an efficient government. We want a streamlined government that doesn't cost too much, that isn't wasteful, but yet provides for quality employees that are paid fairly. I think we can do that without raising some of these things. And I think that's, if it's a known Republican, perhaps maybe be a side jab, but definitely not true.
Okay, and how do you, Mr. Hikida, without raising taxes, how do you meet the needs of the state? What trade-offs do you have to make if you wanted to, what priority would you have that might cost money, and then what do you have to cut in order to pay for that?
Well, like any organization, I think that there's a lot of fat in the state. For a number of years in the private sector, many of us didn't get raises because times were tight. I've never seen the legislature do much of that. But the thing that really concerns me with the death of our iconic Senator Inouye, I see federal funds dwindling as the years go by. And unless we start stimulating our local economy, I think we're going to be in a world of hurt. And so I think we need to support small businesses in particular, because these are the people that generate jobs. And so my thing is that we need to support small business to grow and to flourish.
Okay, and Chris, on that point, the jobs in the economy, I mean, is the state of Hawaii legislature ever been as successful at generating jobs through its policies?
I don't think it's, first of all, the primary job of the legislature to be dictating which jobs are created, but incentivizing industries to grow. Because we can't be the people who decide this industry and this job is going to be the one to make it, but we try to provide a level playing field for everybody and incentives for general direction. The most recent example actually is the solar industry. I mean, we've provided, there's a federal tax credit, we provided a local tax credit because we want to empower homeowners to be able to get off of their high energy bills and reduce their cost to save money. That's a win for everyone. And we've seen the solar industry since 2009 roughly double in size every year, 100% growth, and it's incredible. There's hundreds of jobs that have been created because of that, and hundreds of people who are now getting fed. And it's fantastic that we were able to accomplish that, but I think we were only playing one small part. The bigger issue down the road is going to be, how do we retain an economy that's diverse in the face of changing tourism, in the face of a changing energy sector? I mean, we have $12 billion a year that we get from tourism. We get $20 billion plus from the federal government, and with the passing of the late Senator Inouye, I mean, that's likely to change. We've got to prepare for that. So,
what do you think, Mr. Hikida, is there an area of, you mentioned small business, but is there any other areas that you think need to be incentivized?
Well, I think the legislature several years ago had Act 221 that provided incentives for people to invest into technology. I think we need to look at things like that because we need to stimulate the economy. But I think particularly it needs to be in the area of small business. But and again, as small business grows, I think the tax base increases.
Well, what do you do to help small business grow?
Well, the thing that I hear as I go talking with friends, and I'm in the business. We seem, in the legislature, I guess I should say, seem to change the rules on a yearly basis. And it's difficult to adjust to something when you're constantly changing the rules of the game. And so the best thing the legislature could do is leave small business alone, just minimize the amount of regulations that they have, and minimize the amount of taxes. I know the increase in minimum wage. That's fine, but I think, well, heck, if they want to give everybody a raise, they should have cut the taxes.
Let me, one last subject. We've got about 2.5 minutes left.
Oh.
you've got a farming community there in Waimanalo where you've got side by side people who are doing organic farms, and you've got people who are actually doing research in GMOs in the same community. How is that playing out in the district? How do you feel about regulation of GMOs? And then I'll let you, Chris, finish off.
Well, as I look at the issue of GMOs, I think that particular thing should be regulated by the federal government. I don't know that the state or the city and county has the wherewithal or the resources to properly regulate GMOs.
Are you worried about them at all? Are you afraid of GMOs, or do you think they pose a risk?
Well, talking to the farmers in Waimanalo, they tell me that this is something they need, to continue to effectively be in business. And so I think, if elected, I think what we'd have to do is protect the farmers.
Okay, Representative Lee.
One of the things that we hear most of all, I think, is from consumers, right? They want transparency, they want to know what they're buying. And I definitely think the state has a place providing for labeling, and the House even passed a bill saying that if it's a GMO product, then it can be labeled. And that's no different than putting a Made in Hawaii seal on it. It's something that consumers want with overwhelming support. But the real issue that's still yet to be decided is the issue of pesticide impact. You have a lot of fields, especially in the neighbor islands, that are near hospitals and near schools. In fact, some schools in the neighbor islands have been evacuated because pesticides have drifted over and potentially could have hit the kids. And so the question now is, what do we do about that? How do we regulate and provide transparency so we know what's happening in our own backyard?
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen, very much. We've had a good discussion, and time went really quickly. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I wish you the best of luck.
No, thank you very much.
Coming up, we'll have a discussion about the State House District 4 contest and let me talk a little bit about Hikino. With 90 participating schools, Hikino, the nation's first statewide student news network, is giving Hawaii students the skills they need to succeed in our digital world.
Hikino has come so far from just a few students to where it is now.
If they're from like Na'alehu, Big Island, or Kekaha, Kauai, Hikino gives them the ability to let the whole state know what they're expressing and what their concerns are.
I think Hikino encourages a lot of pride in your community and your school, so you tend to look for those stories. You want to tell those stories.
I really feel having these talented kids who are vested in this community and giving their heart and soul to what they're doing is what is going to guarantee our future.
Keep telling those stories and be proud of where you're from.
The stories of our communities and our neighbors, told by the students who live there. Hikino, Thursday nights at 7:30 on PBS Hawaii.
Every Thursday night, Hikino presents stories told by Hawaii students about the communities in which they live. Now, in recent months, one community, Puna, on the island of Hawaii, has been battered by Tropical Storm Iselle, which interrupted the August primary election and is now threatened by the lava flow from Kilauea. The sprawling district stretches from South Hilo down to Ka'u, the southernmost point in the United States. Tonight, we bring you the two candidates vying to represent State House District 4. Joy San Buenaventura is an attorney who beat out 4 other candidates in a Democratic primary, including Incumbent Representative Faye Hanohano. Ms. San Buenaventura is also a volunteer mediator for the Kuikahi Mediation Center, as well as a volunteer attorney and arbitrator. Gary Thomas, a Republican, is a retired United States Air Force colonel who served 3 combat tours in Afghanistan and the Middle East. He is currently the Deputy Director of Hawaii Youth Challenge on the Big Island and Vice President of the Yeshua Outreach Center in Kea'au. And we've decided to have Mr. Thomas answer the first question. Boy, campaigning in Puna, it's just really hard for me to imagine. The storm, the interruption, the invasion by Senate candidates for a while, and now the lava flow. What's it like campaigning in that environment?
Well, we were just talking about it a minute ago, and I asked the question, how many campaign seasons have had a hurricane and a lava flow hit them at the same time? And I don't think very many, but
probably zero is my guess.
Probably zero. And as Joe will probably tell you too, that it has been difficult because, well, for instance, when Iselle hit us, of course, we were caught right in the middle of it as well. No power and no phone, and helping, working with our neighbors for days. And I actually had suspended my all campaign operations for 3 weeks while we just worked with the community. I mean, that's what was appropriate. That's what was needed. And then we just started, getting things back up again, and then the lava flow is coming down, and now we're working disaster relief kinds of operations and activities, working with that. At the same time, making decisions about how to run the campaign, because we do want to be aware and respectful of the kinds of things that people are going to, and myself and my team are out there talking to folks every day, and very much aware of some of the hardships, and we still have people that are still recovering from Iselle.
Yeah, let me ask Ms. San Buenaventura, if you get your lay adjusted there, how do you think that voters that are so stressed about other life challenges, how do they feel about talking about politics when you approach them?
Basically what I do is I just ask them, how is this affecting you? And what is it that I can do for you? And they will tell you. Because like Gary says, it is very difficult to ask them to vote for you when they're too busy trying to figure out where their kids are going to go to school, where their next house is going to be, whether or not they're going to be able to go to work the next day. These are basic stressors. These are basic needs that they don't think they'll be able to meet next week. I mean, the biggest thing is how I'm going to be paying my mortgage as well as pay rent if I decide to move to Hilo. We already live in a district where the per capita income is far below that of the rest of the state. And you're asking these people to do this. Plus, not only do they have the lava flow going, but what they don't realize, and I could see this because being a mediator as well as an attorney, we have this huge insurance problem. Insurance companies are refusing to renew even though they have been paying faithfully their insurance payments. And as a mediator, what I've seen them do is what people don't realize is it's going to be the third possible disaster that's going to be coming to Puna are foreclosures, because every mortgage is requires that their collateral be insured. Mm-hmm. And I have seen it as a mediator for foreclosures that mortgage companies actually do foreclose when there's no insurance. So they're worried about the insurance, they're worried about the school, they're worried about where they're going to live, and frankly, they're just boxes, empty boxes. It's like gold there now.
Let me ask Mr. Thomas. I mean, does it just change everything when people are in this condition? I mean, first of all, let me ask, just to be fair, is it as dire as Ms. San Buenaventura is describing?
Well, let me answer that this way. The lava flow where it's at right now is more or less stalled for the time being. It's up above Pahoa, a couple of miles up above Pahoa. Has been that way for the last week or so. However, that being the case, that lava flow has already been a game changer in that community without even having touched a single house. We have businesses that are closing down. The real estate market has just dropped. There is nothing moving. And I have a friend of mine that's a realtor, and he said he has no business. We have the insurance and the mortgages, the banks. We just had 2 private schools closed down because a third of their students had moved out of the area.
Let me ask this way: as a person who might end up walking into the legislature, is this giving you sort of a laundry list of things that when you go in the door, you're going to say, there's things that need to be fixed in our laws to protect people against this kind of condition?
Well, absolutely, and even just Puna District has issues just like any other district does, And however, with the lava flow, with the cell, we have to now view those issues through the prism of the impact of the lava on the community. For instance, we've all been talking about the road system, the infrastructure supporting that, the access for emergency vehicles. Well, this only shines a spotlight, a huge spotlight on that deficit, and that's something we need to address in the legislature.
Let me ask Ms. Buenaventura, there was discussion many years ago with prior lava incidents where it took out the Royal Garden subdivision and so on, where they talked not necessarily just about lava, but just about this kind of development where huge tracts are subdivided without any real ability by government to provide the infrastructure. Is that something you think that people might take a second look at in the future about how these areas get developed?
I think they're looking at it now. I mean, the history, Helene Hale, who was our state representative before Faye Hanohano, admitted that back when she was a mayor and county council member, because the county's main tax base was real property taxes, they approved these substandard subdivisions, mostly in Puna, almost all in Puna, that did not have infrastructure, just so that they will have money in their coffers. And now we're paying the price for it. We don't have the roads. And Highway 130 is only this 2-lane road that services over 25,000 people at geographically almost the size of Oahu. It's ridiculous. As you can tell, Daryl Oliveira and Mayor Kinoe saw fit to put in alternate roads. We're requesting that those alternate roads probably should become permanent, because 2 lanes for size of Lower Puna is ridiculous.
Same question to you. Do you think that this is going to cause a whole rediscussion about land use on the Big Island?
Well, I think it has to be addressed along with a whole wide range of things need to be addressed about just the entire infrastructure for Puna, not only the road system, but because of the sudden population growth over the last 4 or 5 years down in Puna, which by some estimates is approaching or even more people down there than there is in Hilo. There's a lot of people down in Puna District. But it's like any other area where it grows quickly, the infrastructure has not grown with it. And exacerbating the problem is the way that the subdivisions were set up without power and water service, and with the way the roads were set up, private roads, without long-range planning. That needs to be addressed and taken care of.
This is turning into a very interesting discussion because it's not the typical political discussion we have. It seems like the two of you are speaking almost as voices for your community here with this opportunity to be on statewide television. Let me ask this question. This lava flow has the potential to literally cut Puna into 2 separate places. Is that, what's going to happen? I mean, is that an insane thought, or literally are we talking about the island of Hawaii, your guys' district, changing forever? Ms. Buenaventura.
Yes. It's surprising. The diversity in Puna, we've got the farmers, we've got the commuters, we've got the regular people, as well as the subsistence, sustainable people over in Kapoho, Kalapana. Surprisingly, the people who have practiced sustainability, the people who live off the land, are really quite excited about the idea of being cut off. Okay, one of them has a plane, and he's looking forward to using Chain of Craters Road as a runway. And of course,
there's going to be a lot of cars on that road.
Well, now I think that idea has been dashed, especially since they're actually going through with it. But yes, it is going to change it. The sustainability is going to be huge, but the big thing also is whether or not we could use some kind of ferry or some kind of shipping way to ship things that cannot be grown, such as fuel, such as propane, to the other side of the island.
I'm working with United Way and Red Cross as executive director for Sure Foundation. And in terms of how we're going to respond to this with the nonprofit community and community, and also working with civil defense. And one of the things that we're looking at more longer range is just the entire climate, because if that lava does go down, cut off 130, continues on down to the ocean, it's going to cut off railroad and then government road. We have Chain of Craters Road out. Hopefully that's going to stay open. But even with that, that's going to change the whole complexion of that community.
That's what I was
left.
getting at. Yeah, you've got this.
So-
You've got basically a very isolated community on the south end of the island.
So
right?
what we're talking about looking at addressing is not only getting the basic necessities in there, and there's a variety of ways we're looking at, pre-placing food and water in there, of course bringing by boat, plane, helicopter. So there's a variety of things that are being planned right now, and civil defense is doing a lot of planning with that. But also, in addition to that, is going in and what's this community going to look like, and how are they going to survive, and because it's a like I mentioned a minute ago, it's a game changer. This community, the whole face of this community is going to change.
Ms. San Buenaventura, when you go and you speak to people and they give you their stories, you talked about the foreclosure issues, the insurance issues. Are you already, the two of you now coming and basically sort of representing your district already in dealing with the counties and the federal government and so on to say, hey, this is going on?
Yes, I've already started. I am lucky in that I'm a member of the Democratic Party, and so and as such, I've campaigned with a number of our sitting state representatives as well as state senators. I've already talked to them that this has got to be like #1 priority. In fact, I know that the state Senate has a special session. I was wondering whether or not there was a possibility it could be expanded so that the insurance issue could be one of them, and I found out that is not a possibility at this time, not this late. But yes, it's one of those things that need to be addressed. It needs to be addressed soon because, this is ridiculous. If you're paying monthly for years, you should be able to count on insurance to finally cover you. And not only that, but by stopping the insurance, you also prevent it from being sold because
right.
You're stuck.
So what do you see as the hopeful piece of all this? Mr. Thomas, do you think that long term, beyond these crises, are you able to even think beyond the crisis at this point about what's the future of this area?
Well, you have to, and coming from a military background, you deal with tactical and you deal with strategic, and you have to be able to plan both ways. And I mentioned a little bit of a minute ago about some of the more strategic, longer range kind of planning. If the roads are cut off, we're looking, 5 years, 10 years down the road, what this is going to look like. As far as positives go, we'll have to see what the lava does, and it may not even cut the roads at all anyway, and that's a possibility as well. I think Puna, Puna's going to survive. They're resilient, they're survivors. And the folks down there, I'm out down there talking to them. There's a lot of folks who are saying we're gonna last this thing out. There's business people that say we're gonna stay here. And
let me ask you kind of a tough question for a Republican, assuming that much of the Republican ideology. It seems like there's a lot of cries for government to really rescue this situation. I've got one caller now. The question is, would it be appropriate for the county state to spend money buying out development rights for the undeveloped lots? Something like that. Do you think that there's going to have to be a huge government investment or some kind of huge government answer to the problems that have been revealed by the lava flow?
I've made a career out of pulling disparate parties together to solve solutions, and I've started up a couple of nonprofits in the Puna area, and there's a lot of help in the community. There are a lot of assets, a lot of resources, there are a lot of people that want to help, and a lot of people that have the means to help. And I would look to that as well as what might be available through legislatively. But I would also go to that. There's a huge network there, bringing in businesses, nonprofits, the churches, private individuals. There's a lot of people that want to help. There's a lot of people. We're getting a lot of phone calls right now of folks on the other islands and folks on the mainland wanting to know, asking us, what do you need? So I would look at all the possibilities and not just stick to one, to put together a plan for how we're going to address this.
Do you have anything to add to that?
You know, I think buying undeveloped land is something that I don't think we have actually looked into. I think the state budget probably does not allow for that, especially with all of the monies that's been going on. And frankly, I don't know whether or not it's even necessary, because large tracts of Puna is either DHHL or DLNR properties already, you know, which are undeveloped.
Hawaiian Homelands or the State Land Department. Right. So do you think that this crisis has revealed to you weaknesses that government has to address? You mentioned the insurance. Can you be specific about what law you would propose to make it so that kind of insurance activity would not happen?
You know, I'm going to try and look to see, because we're not the only community that has had a disaster where the insurance company pulled out. I mean,
usually they pull out afterwards.
Well, yeah. Look at what happened to HIG. I mean, they basically folded after Iniki, and that's how we came up with the insurance fund as a reinsurance. So the question is whether or not we can replicate it for the lava flow. I'm thinking about a possibility of expanding a similar type of no-fault law, which requires insurance companies who practice here in the state of Hawaii to cover at least a minimum amount of fire damage, like $150,000. And of course, beyond that, you have to pay. And I'm just floating this idea, but it's one of those things that if the insurance companies are going to be in the business, the state of Hawaii, they should at least insure people who have had to, where the government has allowed people to purchase and build property.
Have you seen, Mr. Thomas, bad behavior by business people in this time?
Puna?
Yeah.
Business people Puna?
Yeah.
No.
Well, or insurance. We're talking about the insurance industry. We're talking about real estate, various. You know, we've heard that we've heard rumors, and I haven't confirmed this, but we've heard from people who have told us that all of a sudden rents are going up really high. That there might be some gouging there. Are you concerned about that?
I would be concerned about it. My personal experience, and I am out in the subdivisions talking to folks. I have heard, I was down in Hawaiian beaches the other day, that there are some people that are getting some letters about insurance policies. They're not going to be renewed. That needs to be addressed. I think, well, first of all, the letter of the law needs to be followed, and where they're not going to cancel them. But also, secondly, that I think we need to approach the providers in terms of being and tell them it's in your best interest here, to continue the insurance for someone that has an impending disaster, and in terms of good neighbor policy, and we need to approach that. As far as price gouging, I've not heard that. I do know that the rental markets are getting flooded because there's a lot of people moving out past to where they expect the lava flow to go down, HPP, and points towards Hilo. But I have not heard that there's price gouging. But I have heard about the insurance, and I think that needs to be addressed. That's unacceptable.
It's just a really tumultuous situation, just unlike anything that I think anyone's ever experienced in Hawaii. Let's try and do a couple of other issues. We're getting some calls that people would like us to talk about some other things. We have an issue here about medical marijuana. Now, I know I've been to Puna and I visited some of the folks down there. I think you have the highest concentration of medical marijuana permits in the state down there. Ms. San Buenaventura, where do you stand on medical marijuana? What do you think? Where's that issue going, and how does it affect your district?
Medical marijuana is big in my district. I mean, we actually have the land where we can grow the 7 plants, so I could see why we have the permits. But we need dispensaries because, frankly, there are people who need the oils, and the 7 plants are not enough to have the oils for it. Medical marijuana has been shown to have had to have medicinal qualities. It is, in fact, the law now. The question just is dissemination. So,
do you see it having any negative impacts on your district?
I don't see
the prevalence of medical marijuana and abuse of medical marijuana.
I haven't heard of any. In fact, you know, because we do have the medical marijuana permits, people are legal now. People are not being harassed by the police for small possession of marijuana, whereas before they were. So no, I don't see that as having any negative effect on the district.
Mr. Thomas, your feelings about this issue?
Joy's correct. Obviously, it is the law, and I think, though, that they've got a lot of work to do with it yet. As I understand it, for instance, it's illegal to move medical marijuana from island to island in terms of setting up the medical dispensaries. So there are some issues that need to be worked out. Now, as I would default to it, and a big part of my focus in my campaign are families and kids, and I've done a lot of work with kids, is I would default to the kids. Is this negatively impacting the kids? Now, I'm being told anecdotally, and I'm not sure how accurate it is, but that essentially about every third 15-year-old in the high school has a medical marijuana card in their wallet. Having gone to high school here in Hawaii, that may or may not be true. I don't know.
But what you're saying is that in your impression is that there's a lot of young people who probably shouldn't be having medical marijuana?
And I suspect the cards are fake, fake cards as well. So I would want to look closely at that, at the impact on our youth and our kids. Maybe if we look at studies in other areas where there's been this has been in place for a longer period of time.
Ms. San Buenaventura, do you see that kind of problem?
No, I'm a lawyer. I haven't seen that problem at all, and.
So you don't see any ripple of the issue out into the younger people who maybe shouldn't be using?
In any law will have abuses. For the same reason, of course, there's going to be ripple effects of kids smoking, of kids drinking, but it's the same kind of controls. Again, that kids should not have for these types of things. I mean, like for alcohol, for smoke, for tobacco, as well as marijuana.
And just to make sure that I hear you correctly, you're not saying that you would get rid of medical marijuana or anything like that. You just are expressing a concern from the point of view of the youth.
That's correct. I just want to make sure we cover all the bases.
Okay, let me change the subject really quickly one more time now. Energy is a huge issue on the Big Island. That you have what potentially could be one of the biggest resources in the state in geothermal that doesn't seem to have grown significantly. Ms. San Buenaventura, where do you think needs to change to bring down the cost of energy on the Big Island or make other sources of energy available?
As far as geothermal, PGV needs to be a better steward. I mean, they need to quit violating the Clean Air Act and the permits. It can be done right. It isn't being done right. And I'm hoping they would be better stewards at it. Like I said, there is a huge growth over in Kapoho, Kalapana of sustainable people. I mean, they are doing solar. They are off the grid. They have figured out how to use batteries very well. And yes, it's not perfect, but people are doing well with it. As far as if we can give some credit for the people in Puna, if we're going to have geothermal in Puna, we should at least bring down the cost of electricity that we are generating over there. And that's not happening. I mean, if we're going to have the ill effects of having geothermal, we should have some credit too.
Mr. Thomas, how do you feel about that issue?
Geothermal, I think the further we can distance ourselves from a petroleum-based product energy system, the better. That's a step away from that, and so I see that as positive. However, the health and welfare of our communities are foremost, and we got to make sure that's addressed. I know they did a health study in 2013, indicated there are health concerns. I know they're getting ready to commission a $750,000 study here shortly to follow up on that. So we got to make sure that happens. At the same time, it is generating quite a bit of electricity, and it's if we take care of this, we've got a valuable asset, I think. But we've got to take care of the health concerns. We have, of course, wind and solar power. We've got our renewable energy, which I know the state has a goal of hitting that 35% renewable energy by 2030. I'd like to see that move up. I think there needs to be more R&D focus. I come from an IT background. I can tell you right now that in 5 years from now, a lot of technology that we're going to be seeing has yet to be invented. That's how fast it moves. So we're talking 2030. There's a lot of things that are going to be invented before we even get there. So we got to put a lot of effort into R&D as well.
I'm going to stop you just because I want to try to get one quick question. You only have about 30 seconds each. GMOs. What do you think is the role of this county on that?
I think we should go into labeling. That way people have a right to choose and farmers have a right to grow.
GMO, I agree with the labeling. It's what we need for our community. But also, GMO is a very generic term. And it covers a wide range of things from basic hybridization, which we've been doing for a long time, all the way over to genetic changes. And we need to take a look at that. Do we need to, in one fell swoop, regulate everything, or do we break it up and regulate certain parts of it?
Ms. Senator, do you agree with that?
Generally, no, I don't agree that GMOs include hybridization. I believe that GMO can be actually defined to be genetically modified organisms and not hybridization.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a fun conversation, and I wish you and the folks in Puna all the luck in the world, and bless them for what they're going through. Thank you so much. A large field of candidates for the open seat in the 1st Congressional District is now down to 2. Democratic State Representative Mark Takai and former Congressman and Councilman Charles DeJoux, the Republican. Next week, Representative Takai and Mr. DeJoux will join me for a discussion on why each of them believes they offer the best representation in Washington, D.C. for Hawaii. That's next week on Insights. I'm Daryl Huff. A hui ho.